The transport ship Meridian's Edge hummed through the void between star systems, carrying its diverse cargo of passengers to the mining colony of Kepler 442b. Among the travelers sat a young human woman who drew curious glances from the other species aboard. Maya Chen appeared to be in her early 20s, with delicate features and a slight build that made her look almost fragile against the backdrop of towering Vorthak warriors and heavily muscled Terran miners. She kept to herself in the corner of the passenger compartment, reading from a worn paperback book while sipping tea from a ceramic cup she'd brought from Earth. Her long black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore comfortable civilian clothes that looked entirely unremarkable. To the casual observer, she seemed like just another young human seeking work in the outer colonies, perhaps running from something on Earth or simply looking for adventure among the stars. The Vorthak passengers found her particularly amusing. These 7-foot-tall reptilian beings were known throughout the galaxy for their warrior culture and combat prowess. They whispered among themselves in their clicking language, occasionally glancing at Maya with what their species considered humor. One of them, a scarred veteran named Thektar, finally approached her seat. "Little human," he said in heavily accented standard, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke. "You travel alone to the mining worlds. This is dangerous for one so delicate." Maya looked up from her book, marking her page with a finger. Her brown eyes met his yellow reptilian gaze without flinching. "I appreciate your concern," she said politely, her voice soft and measured. "But I can take care of myself." Thektar's throat sac inflated slightly, the Vorthak equivalent of laughter. "The mining colonies are full of rough beings. Criminals, outcasts, those who live by violence. A fragile flower like you would be crushed before the first sunrise." Other passengers had begun to pay attention to the conversation. A group of Terran miners nodded in agreement with the Vorthak warrior. The colonies were indeed dangerous places, where only the strong survived and the weak were quickly consumed by the harsh realities of frontier life. "Perhaps," Maya said simply, returning to her book. "We'll see." The Vorthak warrior seemed taken aback by her calm response. In his culture, such a dismissal would be grounds for a challenge to combat. But looking at the small human woman, he could hardly justify fighting someone who appeared to pose no threat whatsoever. He returned to his companions, shaking his massive head in bewilderment. As the hours passed, Maya continued reading, occasionally getting up to stretch her legs or visit the ship's small cafeteria. She moved with an easy grace that some might have attributed to dance training or perhaps yoga practice. Nobody paid particular attention to the way she unconsciously catalogued every exit, every potential weapon, every tactical advantage in each room she entered. The trouble started 3 days into the journey when the ship dropped out of hyperspace for a routine navigation check. Long-range sensors detected what appeared to be a derelict vessel drifting in the system, and Captain Rodriguez decided to investigate. It was standard protocol to check for survivors, and salvage rights could prove profitable if the ship had been abandoned. What they found instead was a trap. The derelict suddenly came to life as the Meridian's Edge approached, revealing itself to be a heavily armed pirate vessel. The raiders had been using the false distress beacon to lure unsuspecting ships into their web for months. Their ship, the Blood Talon, was a converted military frigate bristling with weapons and crewed by some of the most vicious criminals in this sector of space. "Attention, merchant vessel," came the harsh voice over the communication system. "You are now under the authority of Captain Vex and the crew of the Blood Talon. Prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in the spacing of your passengers." Captain Rodriguez had no choice but to comply. The Meridian's Edge was a civilian transport with minimal defensive capabilities, while the pirate ship outgunned them 10-1. He ordered his crew to stand down and prepare for boarding as the enemy vessel moved alongside, extending docking tubes to create a connection between the ships. In the passenger compartment, panic began to spread. The miners cursed and looked around for anything that could serve as weapons. The Vorthak warriors hissed in frustration at being caught in such a helpless position. Several other passengers began to weep or pray to their various gods. Maya calmly closed her book and slipped it into her travel bag. She remained seated as the first pirates came through the airlock, their weapons drawn and their intentions clear. They were a mixed crew of humans, Vorthak and other species, all united by greed and violence. The pirate leader, a scarred human with cybernetic implants covering half his face, surveyed the passenger compartment with obvious satisfaction. "Well, well," he said, his voice artificially enhanced by his vocal modifications. "Looks like we've got ourselves a nice haul here. You'll all be coming with us for processing. The strong ones will be sold as slaves, the weak ones, well, let's just say the universe has no use for dead weight." His eyes fell on Maya, and his expression changed to one of predatory interest. "Except for you, sweetheart. You look like you'd fetch a premium price in the right markets. Don't worry, we'll take real good care of you." The other passengers watched in horror as more pirates poured through the airlock, beginning to separate them into groups. The Vorthak warriors were shackled with heavy restraints designed for their species, while the miners were herded together like cattle. Maya remained in her seat, apparently frozen with fear like so many others. One of the pirates, a brutal-looking Kitharan with razor-sharp claws, noticed her stillness and approached. "What's wrong with this one?" he asked his leader. "She seems broken already." The cyborg pirate captain grinned, revealing teeth that had been replaced with metal fangs. "Sometimes the pretty ones go into shock. Makes them easier to handle. Grab her and bring her to my quarters. I want to interview her personally." The Kitharan reached out with one clawed hand to seize Maya's arm. She looked up at him with those same calm brown eyes, and for just a moment he hesitated. There was something in her gaze that didn't match her fragile appearance, something that made his predatory instincts suddenly scream danger. But it was already too late. Maya's hand moved faster than the eye could follow. The ceramic teacup she'd been holding throughout the journey suddenly became a weapon, its edge striking the Kitharan's throat with surgical precision. The alien's windpipe collapsed instantly, and he dropped to the deck, clawing at his neck as he suffocated. Before anyone could react to what had just happened, Maya was already in motion. She rolled from her seat, her book bag swinging around to strike another pirate in the temple with enough force to shatter bone. The bag's contents weren't books at all, but carefully concealed combat equipment disguised as innocent personal items. The pirate captain's enhanced reflexes allowed him to begin drawing his weapon, but Maya was already inside his guard. Her elbow connected with his solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs, while her other hand found the neural interface port behind his left ear. A quick twist and his cybernetic enhancements sparked and died, leaving him temporarily blind and deaf. The transformation was so sudden and complete that the other pirates froze in confusion. The fragile-looking human girl they had dismissed as harmless prey had just disabled 3 of their number in less than 5 seconds. The delicate flower had revealed thorns sharp enough to kill. "What the hell?" one of the remaining pirates started to say, but Maya was already moving toward him. She moved like liquid death, her every gesture economical and precise. A nerve strike dropped him to his knees, paralyzed from the neck down. Another pirate raised his energy rifle, but Maya's thrown teacup struck his wrist with enough force to break it, sending the weapon clattering across the deck. The passenger compartment erupted into chaos as the remaining pirates finally overcame their shock and began to respond. Energy bolts sizzled through the air where Maya had been standing, but she was no longer there. She flowed between the seats like smoke, using the confined space to her advantage rather than allowing it to trap her. Dektar, the Vorthak warrior who had earlier expressed concern for her safety, watched in amazement as the small human systematically dismantled her attackers. She moved with a grace and efficiency that exceeded anything he had seen in his decades of combat experience. Her strikes were precisely targeted, each one designed to disable rather than kill unless absolutely necessary. A burly human pirate lunged at her with a vibro knife, the weapon's edge humming with deadly energy. Maya sidestepped the clumsy attack and trapped his arm, using his own momentum to drive the blade into the deck plating where it stuck fast. A quick pressure point strike to his neck sent him into unconsciousness before he could react. The other passengers began to realize what was happening. This wasn't random luck or desperate flailing. The young woman they had all dismissed as helpless was systematically defeating trained killers with her bare hands. Every movement was deliberate, every strike precisely calculated for maximum effect. "She's military," one of the Terran miners whispered to his companion. "Look at the way she moves. That's not civilian training." But even military training didn't explain what they were witnessing. Maya fought with a fluidity and effectiveness that suggested something far beyond standard combat instruction. This was the work of someone who had been shaped into a living weapon, trained to kill with anything from high-tech armaments to simple household objects. More pirates poured through the airlock, alerted by the sounds of combat. Maya assessed the new threat level and adjusted her tactics accordingly. She grabbed a fallen energy rifle and checked its charge in a single smooth motion that spoke of countless hours of weapon familiarization training. "Everyone get down," she called to the other passengers, her voice carrying an authority that made even the proud Vorthak warriors drop to the deck without question. This wasn't the soft, polite tone they had heard earlier. This was the voice of someone accustomed to command in life-or-death situations. The energy rifle spoke 3 times in rapid succession, each shot precisely placed to disable rather than kill. The new arrivals found themselves facing an opponent who could outshoot them, while simultaneously engaging in hand-to-hand combat with their comrades. It was impossible, yet it was happening before their eyes. A Vorthak pirate, massive and scarred from countless battles, charged at Maya with a roar of challenge. She waited until the last possible moment before stepping aside and using his own momentum to send him crashing into the bulkhead. The impact left a dent in the reinforced metal and dropped the warrior into unconsciousness. The pirate captain, his cybernetics slowly coming back online, tried to crawl toward a fallen weapon. Maya noticed the movement and casually kicked the weapon away, while continuing to engage 2 other attackers simultaneously. She was fighting a dozen opponents in a confined space and winning, making it look effortless. "Impossible," Tektar muttered in his own language, his warrior's pride warring with admiration for what he was witnessing. No single being could do this, but Maya was doing it. Each fallen pirate reduced the odds against her, and she was systematically working her way through their numbers with mechanical efficiency. Her movements never seemed hurried or desperate. If anything, she appeared to be holding back, using only as much force as necessary to neutralize each threat. The remaining pirates began to realize they were facing something beyond their understanding. Panic crept into their ranks as their numbers dwindled. Some tried to retreat back toward the airlock, but Maya was already positioning herself to cut off their escape route. In the space of less than 10 minutes, the passenger compartment had been transformed from a scene of helpless capture to a battlefield where a single small human had turned the tables on a crew of experienced raiders. The other passengers watched in stunned silence as Maya stood among the fallen bodies, breathing normally and showing no signs of fatigue. She calmly retrieved her book from her travel bag and resumed her seat, as if nothing unusual had happened. The transformation back to mild-mannered passenger was so complete that if not for the unconscious and disabled pirates scattered around her, it would have been easy to believe the entire incident had been a hallucination. "Well," she said quietly, opening her book to the page she had marked, "I suppose we should contact the authorities about this." The silence in the passenger compartment stretched on for several heartbeats as everyone tried to process what they had just witnessed. Tektar was the first to find his voice, though his words came out as a reverent whisper in his native clicking language, before he switched to standard. "Who are you?" he asked, his yellow eyes fixed on Maya with a mixture of respect and wariness that would have been unthinkable just minutes before. Maya looked up from her book again, and for a moment her expression seemed almost amused. "I'm exactly who I said I was, a passenger traveling to the mining colonies." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "I just happen to have some additional skills." Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom, tense with confusion and fear. "Passenger deck, what's your status? We're reading weapons fire and some kind of disturbance." Maya stood and walked to the nearest communication panel, stepping carefully around the unconscious pirates. "This is Maya Chen, Captain. The boarding party has been neutralized. You'll want to secure the pirate vessel and contact Colonial Security about prisoner transfer." "Neutralized?" Rodriguez's voice climbed an octave. "How many casualties do we have?" "None among the passengers or crew," Maya replied calmly. "The pirates are unconscious but alive. Most of them will require medical attention, but nothing life-threatening." The Terran miners exchanged glances, their earlier assessment proving correct, but still falling short of the reality. This wasn't just military training they had witnessed. This was something else entirely, something that suggested capabilities far beyond what any normal soldier should possess. One of the younger passengers, a Centauri trader named Veltar, finally worked up the courage to speak. "That was impossible. No one person could do what you just did. The math doesn't work." Maya returned to her seat, smoothing her clothes as if straightening her appearance after a minor inconvenience. "Physics and mathematics are quite reliable," she said. But most people misunderstand what those equations actually represent when applied to combat situations. She gestured toward one of the fallen pirates, a massive Gorvak whose species was known for their incredible strength and durability. Size and strength matter, but they're not the only variables. Speed, precision, knowledge of anatomy and pressure points, understanding of leverage and momentum, these factors can overcome raw physical advantages when properly applied. Thektar studied her with the eye of a lifelong warrior. You speak of combat theory like a scholar, but you fight like something from our ancient legends. What kind of training produces such results? For the first time since the incident began, Maya's composure seemed to crack slightly. A shadow passed across her features, so brief that most observers might have missed it. The kind of training you hope no one ever has to receive, she said quietly. Captain Rodriguez arrived with a security team expecting to find a massacre. Instead, they discovered a scene that looked more like the aftermath of a precision military operation. The pirates were efficiently restrained and beginning to regain consciousness, while the passengers sat in stunned silence around a young woman who was calmly reading a book. "Miss Chen," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a note of authority mixed with confusion, "I'm going to need a full report on what happened here. And I'm going to need to know exactly who you are." Maya marked her page again and looked up at the captain. "I'm a colonial settler, Captain, just like my passenger manifest states. As for what happened, the pirates attempted to board your vessel with hostile intent. I prevented them from carrying out that intent." "You prevented them?" Rodriguez looked around at the dozen unconscious raiders. "Alone?" "The physics worked in my favor," Maya said simply. "Confined space, predictable entry points, opponents who underestimated the threat level. Basic tactical advantages." Rodriguez had served in the Colonial Defense Force for 15 years before taking command of the Meridian's Edge. He recognized military terminology when he heard it, and Maya's casual use of tactical language suggested training that went far beyond civilian self-defense courses. "Miss Chen, I'm going to need to see your complete identification and travel documents, and I'm going to need you to explain exactly what kind of training you've received." Maya reached into her travel bag and produced a datapad containing her papers. Everything appeared to be in order. Birth certificate from Earth, colonial settler visa, clean criminal record, even medical documentation that seemed perfectly normal. But Rodriguez had learned to read between the lines during his military service. "These documents are very clean," he observed. "Almost too clean for someone who's lived 24 years. No parking tickets, no minor infractions, no medical emergencies. That's unusual for anyone, especially someone from Earth." "I've lived a quiet life," Maya replied. "I prefer to avoid complications." Thektar snorted, a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. "Quiet life?" "Little human, what we just witnessed was not the work of someone who avoids complications. That was the work of someone trained to create them." The Vorthak warrior's assessment drew nods from several other passengers. The miners, the traders, even the normally stoic Centauri delegation seemed to agree that Maya's explanation didn't match her demonstrated capabilities. Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's medical officer, arrived to assess the casualties and found herself staring at the unconscious pirates in professional amazement. "Captain, these injuries are incredibly precise. Each one targeted specific nerve clusters or pressure points with surgical accuracy. Whoever did this has extensive knowledge of multiple alien anatomies." She knelt beside the Catharan pirate, whose throat had been crushed by Maya's teacup. "This strike damaged the windpipe without causing permanent injury. The attacker knew exactly how much force to apply to incapacitate without killing. That level of precision requires years of specialized training." Maya watched the medical examination with interest but without concern. "I studied xenobiology in university," she offered. "You pick up things about different species' anatomical vulnerabilities. Xenobiology students don't typically learn how to apply that knowledge in combat situations," Dr. Kim replied. "This kind of precision comes from hands-on training with live subjects." The implications of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The kind of training that involved practicing on live subjects wasn't something that happened in university classrooms. It was the domain of intelligence agencies, special forces units, and organizations that operated in the shadows between legitimate government work and outright criminality. Rodriguez made a decision that would change the course of the journey for everyone aboard. "Miss Chen, I'm placing you under protective custody until we reach our destination, for the safety of all passengers." Maya's expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes that made the captain take an involuntary step backward. Protective custody, Captain? Are you suggesting I'm a threat to the other passengers? I'm suggesting that someone with your capabilities might attract the kind of attention we'd all prefer to avoid, Rodriguez replied carefully. And I'm suggesting that those capabilities raise questions about your true identity and purpose. The young woman who had seemed so fragile just hours before closed her book and stood, her movements carrying an unconscious authority that made hardened spacers step aside. Very well, Captain. I'll cooperate with your investigation, but I should warn you, you might not like what you discover. The ship's security office was a cramped space designed more for storing equipment than conducting interrogations. But Captain Rodriguez had few alternatives. Maya sat across from him at the small metal table, her hands folded calmly in her lap, while he reviewed her documentation on his personal datapad. I've been in contact with Colonial Security, Rodriguez said, his voice carefully neutral. Your documents check out through standard verification channels, but I've requested a deeper background investigation. They should have preliminary results within 6 hours. Maya nodded. I expected as much. You're being prudent, Captain. In your position, I would do the same thing. The casual way she assessed his decision-making process bothered Rodriguez more than he cared to admit. Most civilians became nervous or defensive when subjected to official scrutiny. Maya's reaction suggested someone accustomed to operating under assumed identities or false documentation. While we're waiting, he continued, perhaps you could explain how a xenobiology student acquired the kind of combat training we witnessed today. University coursework typically doesn't include advanced fighting techniques. Maya was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing her options. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weariness that seemed at odds with her apparent age. Captain, there are some things in this galaxy that are better left buried. Some knowledge that serves no good purpose once it's brought into the light. I'm afraid that's not an option, Rodriguez replied. I have a ship full of passengers and crew who need to know they're safe. After what they witnessed today, I can't simply ignore the questions your actions have raised. Fair enough. Maya leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxing slightly. Tell me, Captain, what do you know about the Terran Colonial Defense Forces Special Operations Division? Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. The Special Operations Division was classified at levels that made most military personnel pretend it didn't exist. I know it's not something discussed in polite company, he said carefully. Wise policy, Maya agreed. The division handles situations that regular military forces can't manage. Situations that require capabilities beyond conventional training. They recruit from very specific populations and subject candidates to conditioning that produces results like what you saw today. The captain studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. Are you saying you're special operations? I'm saying I was recruited by an organization that doesn't officially exist, trained in methods that violate several interstellar treaties, and deployed on missions that never appeared in any historical record. Maya's voice remained steady, but her eyes held depths of experience that seemed far older than her apparent years, until 18 months ago when I decided I'd had enough. Rodriguez's datapad chimed with an incoming message. The preliminary background check had arrived faster than expected, which usually meant either very good news or very bad news. He read the results with growing concern. According to Colonial Security, Maya Chen died in a transport accident near the Vega system 14 months ago, he said slowly. Her body was never recovered due to the complete destruction of the vessel involved. Convenient, isn't it? Maya's tone was dry. Transport accidents are remarkably useful for establishing new identities, especially when the accident reports are filed by people who understand the value of creative documentation. So, who are you really? Maya was quiet for several seconds as if deciding how much truth she could safely reveal. My real name wouldn't mean anything to you, Captain. The person I used to be was erased so thoroughly that sometimes I'm not entirely sure she ever existed. What matters is who I am now, someone trying to build a quiet life away from the shadows. The ship's intercom crackled to life with an urgent message from the bridge. Captain Rodriguez to the command deck immediately. We have multiple vessels approaching on an intercept course. Rodriguez stood, his face grim. This conversation isn't over, Miss Chen, or whoever you are. No, Maya agreed, rising as well. I suspect it's just beginning. They made their way to the bridge where the crew was clustered around the sensor displays with expressions of barely controlled panic. First Officer Martinez looked up as Rodriguez entered, his face pale with concern. "Captain, we've got 5 ships incoming. Configuration suggests military or paramilitary vessels, but they're not broadcasting any identification signals." Rodriguez moved to the command station and studied the tactical display. The approaching ships were maintaining a tight formation that spoke of professional coordination and hostile intent. "How long until intercept?" 47 minutes at current relative velocity, Martinez replied. "Should I signal for assistance?" "Signal away, but don't expect help to arrive in time," Rodriguez said grimly. "We're 3 days out from the nearest colonial patrol route." Maya stepped up to the tactical console and studied the sensor readings with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years analyzing similar displays. "Those aren't random pirates, Captain. That's a hunter-killer formation designed for ship capture rather than destruction. Someone wants your vessel and cargo intact. And you think this is connected to our earlier incident?" "Pirates don't usually operate in squadrons," Maya observed. "And they certainly don't maintain communication silence during approach. This suggests military discipline and specific intelligence about our route and cargo." Rodriguez felt the pieces clicking into place in his mind. "They're not after the ship or the cargo. They're after you." Maya's expression confirmed his suspicions. "It's possible. My former employers have extensive resources and long memories. They also have a policy against allowing their assets to simply walk away." "Assets? People like me are expensive to create, Captain. The training process takes years and has a high casualty rate. Organizations that make such investments tend to want returns on their capital." The bridge crew was listening to the conversation with growing alarm. The idea that their passenger had brought this kind of attention to their ship was terrifying enough, but the implications of what she was revealing were even worse. "How do we handle this?" Rodriguez asked. "Can we outrun them?" Maya studied the tactical display again, her fingers dancing over the console controls with familiar expertise. "Not in this ship. They have us outgunned and outmaneuvered, but running isn't the only option." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we give them what they came for," Maya said quietly. "Me, but not in the way they expect." Rodriguez stared at her. "I'm not turning one of my passengers over to hostile forces." "You're not turning me over, Captain. You're allowing me to do what I was trained to do." Maya's voice carried a cold certainty that made everyone on the bridge take an involuntary step back. "Those ships represent a threat to every person on this vessel. Eliminating threats is what people like me exist for." The approaching vessels were close enough now for visual confirmation. They were sleek, predatory-looking ships with the kind of advanced technology that only government agencies or very well-funded criminal organizations could afford. Their formation was tightening, preparing for boarding operations. "What exactly are you proposing?" Rodriguez asked, though part of him was afraid to hear the answer. Maya's smile was sharp enough to cut through hull plating. "I'm proposing we show them exactly why their former asset was worth so much investment, and why letting me go was the biggest mistake they ever made." Maya moved through the ship's corridors with purpose, her earlier demeanor of mild-mannered passenger completely abandoned. Captain Rodriguez followed, trying to keep up with her rapid pace while simultaneously coordinating the ship's defensive preparations through his comm unit. "The maintenance shafts on Deck 3 connect to the primary power conduits," Maya said, her voice crisp and professional. "If I can access the ship's internal systems, I can create some unpleasant surprises for boarding parties." "How do you know our ship's layout so well?" Rodriguez asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Standard colonial transport design marked the 7 configuration. "I've been on dozens of ships with identical specifications." Maya paused at an access panel and began working on its security lock with tools that definitely hadn't been in her original luggage. "Your former military service shows in your crew assignments and emergency protocols, by the way. Very textbook, which makes your responses predictable to anyone with the right training." The lock clicked open, revealing a cramped maintenance tunnel lined with power cables and life support systems. Maya squeezed inside with practiced ease, moving like someone who had spent considerable time in similar confined spaces. "Rodriguez to all stations," the captain spoke into his comm. "Hostile boarding imminent. All crew to battle stations, passengers to emergency shelters." Maya's voice came back through the comm system, though she was no longer visible in the tunnel. "Captain, you'll want to modify that order. Keep your crew at their posts, but have them prepare for rapid decompression in sections 4 through 7, and tell your engineering team to reroute power through the secondary grid when I give the signal. How? Are you accessing our comm system from a maintenance tunnel? The same way I'm about to access several other systems that your ship's designers thought were secure. There was a note of professional satisfaction in Maya's voice. These vessels weren't designed with internal security as a priority. Their builders assumed that anyone who made it past the external defenses would be friendly. The first of the hunter-killer ships had matched velocity with the Meridian's edge curve and was extending docking tubes. Through the bridge viewports, Rodriguez could see armored figures moving through the transparent connecting tunnels. They moved with military precision, their equipment far more sophisticated than the pirates who had attempted the earlier boarding. These aren't bounty hunters, Rodriguez observed grimly. This is a full military operation. Of course it is, Maya's voice crackled through the comm. My former employers don't do anything halfway. The boarding party will consist of at least 30 operatives with advanced training and equipment. Under normal circumstances, they would be able to secure this vessel in under 10 minutes. Under normal circumstances? Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't be facing someone who helped design their training protocols. The lights throughout the ship flickered momentarily as Maya did something to the electrical systems. A few seconds later, the artificial gravity fluctuated, causing several crew members to grab onto nearby fixtures for support. Sorry about that, Maya's voice came over the comm. Just making some adjustments to our environmental controls. The boarding party is going to find the atmosphere a bit more challenging than they expected. Through the sensor displays, Rodriguez watched as the lead assault team breached the outer airlock. They moved through the entry chamber with professional efficiency, their scanner readings confirming what they expected to find: a lightly defended civilian transport with standard security measures. What they didn't expect was for the internal atmospheric controls to suddenly shift, reducing oxygen content while increasing atmospheric pressure. The change was subtle enough to avoid triggering their suit alarms, but significant enough to impair cognitive function and reaction times. Maya, what did you just do? Created a mild hyperbaric environment with reduced oxygen saturation, came the reply. It mimics the effects of altitude sickness. Their enhanced reflexes and decision-making capabilities will degrade over the next 15 minutes. Not enough to incapacitate them, but enough to level the playing field. The boarding party continued their advance through the ship's corridors, following standard tactical protocols for vessel seizure. They had studied the Meridian's edge's layout and knew exactly where to go to secure key positions. What they didn't know was that someone was rewriting the rules as they moved. Maya had spent her time in the maintenance tunnels doing more than just adjusting life support systems. She had accessed the ship's internal sensor network and now had real-time tracking of every member of the boarding party. She could see their positions, their movement patterns, and their tactical deployment through her hijacked access to the ship's security systems. Captain, she said through the comm, I need you to implement emergency lockdown protocols in 30 seconds. Seal all interior bulkheads and activate the fire suppression systems in sections 3 through 6. That will trap our own crew in those sections. Your crew knows this ship and has breathing apparatus. The boarding party doesn't and won't be prepared for a full halon dump. Trust me. Rodriguez hesitated for only a moment before implementing Maya's request. Throughout the affected sections, blast doors slammed shut, while fire suppression systems flooded the corridors with halon gas designed to extinguish fires by displacing oxygen. The boarding party found themselves separated into smaller groups and struggling to breathe through equipment not designed for chemical fire suppressants. Maya emerged from the maintenance tunnel onto Deck 2, where she had calculated the largest concentration of hostiles would be located. The corridor was filled with the acrid smell of halon gas and the sound of confused voices speaking in military code. Through the artificial fog created by the suppression system, she could see the dim outlines of armored figures trying to regroup. She moved through the chemical haze like a ghost, her knowledge of the ship's layout allowing her to navigate without the visual references the boarding party was struggling to maintain. Her first target was the team leader, identifiable by the enhanced communication array on his armor and his position relative to the other operatives. The neural strike that dropped him was delivered through a weak point in his armor's neck joint, a vulnerability that Maya had helped identify during the development of similar equipment years earlier. The team leader collapsed without making a sound, his enhanced suit registering the hit as a system malfunction rather than an attack. The second operative fell to a pressure point strike that temporarily paralyzed his weapon arm. By the time he realized what had happened, Maya was already engaging a third target. She moved through the hostile team like a predator among prey, using their own tactics and equipment against them. The boarding party's discipline began to break down as members of their assault teams simply vanished into the chemical fog. Their communication systems designed to coordinate complex operations became a liability, as confused reports flooded the command frequency. Team Alpha, report status. Team Alpha is down. Unknown hostiles in the corridor. Impossible. Scans showed minimal resistance capability. Tell that to Alpha Team, Command. We've got people disappearing faster than we can track them. Maya paused in her systematic dismantling of the boarding party to access a fallen operative's communication system. She patched into their command frequency, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to giving orders in combat situations. "Attention, boarding party," she said, her words reaching every hostile on the ship simultaneously. "You are operating under false intelligence. This vessel is defended by assets with capabilities beyond your current tactical assessment. I strongly recommend immediate withdrawal." The response was predictably military and predictably stubborn. "Unknown speaker, identify yourself immediately." Maya's laugh was devoid of humor. "I'm someone you should have left alone." The ship's internal sensors painted a picture that the boarding party's commanders found increasingly difficult to accept. 30 highly trained operatives were being systematically defeated by what appeared to be a single individual, moving through their ranks like a force of nature. The tactical displays showed their teams fragmenting and falling silent one by one as Maya continued her counter-assault. "This is impossible," the mission commander aboard the lead hunter-killer vessel said, staring at his tactical readouts. "One person cannot neutralize an entire assault company." His communications officer looked up from her station with barely concealed fear. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the target vessel. Audio only, but it's coming through our secure channels." Maya's voice filled the command center of the enemy ship, calm and professional despite the chaos she was creating. "Commander, I believe we need to discuss terms." "Terms?" The commander's voice cracked slightly. "You're in no position to negotiate terms." "Really?" "Because from where I'm standing, surrounded by your unconscious operatives, it looks like I hold all the tactical advantages." Maya paused, and they could hear the sound of weapons being systematically disabled in the background. "But I'm willing to be reasonable. You withdraw your remaining forces and I won't need to demonstrate what I can do to your ships." The commander gestured frantically to his tactical officer. "Status report on the boarding parties." "Sir, we've lost contact with Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie teams. Delta team is reporting heavy casualties and requesting immediate extraction. Echo team has barricaded themselves in the cargo bay and refuses to advance further." Maya's voice continued over the open channel, as if she could hear their conversation. "Your people are well trained, Commander, but they're not prepared for this kind of opposition. I've neutralized 26 of your operatives without causing any permanent injuries. That was mercy, not inability. Don't force me to change my approach." Captain Rodriguez, monitoring the situation from the bridge, watched in amazement as the tactical situation continued to deteriorate for the attacking forces. Maya had turned what should have been a simple vessel seizure into a nightmare scenario for the hostiles. "How is she doing this?" First Officer Martinez whispered, staring at the internal sensor displays that showed unconscious armored figures scattered throughout the ship's corridors. "Years of training and conditioning that most people can't even imagine," Rodriguez replied grimly, "and knowledge of exactly how these operations are supposed to work." The enemy commander was clearly struggling with a situation outside his mission parameters. "Unknown operative, you will surrender immediately or face the consequences of your actions." Maya's laugh echoed through the command center, cold and utterly without fear. "Consequences? Commander, I spent 8 years creating consequences for people who threatened civilian populations. I know exactly what those consequences look like, and I'm very good at implementing them." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a note of professional interest. "Tell me, what's the current market rate for Special Operations Division assets these days? Because I'm curious about exactly how much my former employers are paying you for this retrieval operation." The silence that followed was telling. The mission commander clearly hadn't expected his target to be aware of the financial arrangements involved in her capture. I thought so, Maya continued. Well, let me explain something about return on investment, Commander. The cost of creating someone like me includes extensive conditioning, years of training, and a substantial casualty rate among candidates. That investment is only worthwhile if the asset remains loyal and operational. Through the ship's internal systems, she accessed the main communication array and began broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously. But when that asset decides to walk away, the smart play is to write off the loss and move on. Attempting forced retrieval just demonstrates poor understanding of what you're dealing with. The remaining members of Delta Team had managed to establish a defensive position in one of the ship's cargo holds, using shipping containers as cover, while they tried to make sense of their deteriorating situation. Their team leader, a veteran operative with 15 years of special operations experience, had never encountered anything like what they were facing. Command, this is Delta Leader, he reported through his comm system. Request immediate extraction. We are not equipped for this level of opposition. Maya's voice came through their communication channel, though she shouldn't have had access to their encrypted frequencies. Delta Team, this is your opposition speaking. You have two options. You can surrender your weapons and equipment and walk back to your ship, or you can try to continue this operation and discover exactly why your briefings were so inadequate. The Delta Team leader looked around at his remaining operatives, seeing his own confusion and concern reflected in their faces. Who are you? I'm the asset you came to retrieve, Maya replied. And I'm demonstrating why forced retrieval was never a viable option. Through the cargo hold's security monitors, they could see a figure moving through the shadows between shipping containers. She appeared to be unarmed and alone, but after what had happened to the other teams, none of them were willing to underestimate the threat she represented. This is insane, one of the operatives muttered. One person cannot defeat an entire assault company. Tell that to Alpha through Charlie teams, the team leader replied grimly. Because they're not answering their comms. Maya stepped into view, her hands visible and empty, her posture relaxed and unthreatening. But something in her expression made every member of Delta Team instinctively reach for their weapons. Gentlemen, she said calmly, I'm going to give you the same offer I gave your commander. Walk away, return to your ships. File a report stating that the target was not found aboard this vessel. Everyone goes home alive and uninjured, and if we refuse? The Delta leader asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Maya's smile was sharp enough to cut through armor plating. Then you get to find out exactly what 8 years of advanced conditioning produces when all the safety protocols are removed. The operative standing closest to her made the mistake of taking her calm demeanor for weakness. He lunged forward with his enhanced combat reflexes, expecting to overwhelm her before she could react. Instead, he found himself flying backward into a shipping container with enough force to leave a dent in the reinforced metal. The rest of Delta Team opened fire immediately, their energy weapons filling the cargo hold with deadly bolts of coherent light. But Maya was no longer where they were aiming. She moved between the shipping containers like liquid shadow, her path unpredictable and her speed impossible to track. By the time the weapons fire stopped, 3 more operatives were unconscious and the team leader found himself staring down the barrel of his own sidearm, which Maya had somehow acquired during the brief engagement. Final offer, gentlemen, she said, her voice steady despite having just defeated 4 enhanced combat operatives in under 30 seconds, though I should mention that my patience with this situation is beginning to wear thin. The remaining members of Delta Team looked at each other, then at their unconscious comrades, then at the small human woman who had just demonstrated capabilities that defied everything they thought they knew about combat operations. We surrender, the Delta leader said quietly. We surrender. The aftermath of the failed boarding operation left the hunter-killer squadron in a state of confusion that their commanders had never anticipated. 37 highly trained operatives had been systematically defeated by a single individual, with no fatalities but numerous injuries that would require extended medical treatment. The mission parameters had assumed minimal resistance and rapid asset recovery. Instead, they faced a tactical disaster that would require extensive explanation to their employers. Maya stood in the cargo hold surrounded by the equipment and weapons voluntarily surrendered by Delta Team. Speaking to the mission commander, through the ship's communication system, Her voice carried the professional tone of someone conducting a business negotiation, rather than the aftermath of a combat operation. "Commander, I trust this demonstration has clarified the situation for your superiors," she said, methodically disabling the surrendered weapons with practiced efficiency. Attempting to retrieve an asset who doesn't wish to be retrieved is expensive, dangerous, and ultimately counterproductive. The enemy commander's voice was tight with frustration and barely controlled anger. "This operation is not concluded. We have additional resources available." "Of course you do," Maya agreed calmly. "But consider the cost-benefit analysis. You've already lost an entire assault company. Your operational security has been compromised, and you've demonstrated to every intelligence service in this sector that your organization is willing to attack civilian vessels in neutral space." Captain Rodriguez, monitoring the conversation from the bridge, found himself impressed despite the circumstances. Maya was dismantling the enemy's strategic position as efficiently as she had defeated their tactical teams. "Furthermore," Maya continued, "you now have 37 operatives who will need to explain to their families and colleagues how they were defeated by someone they thought was a harmless civilian. That kind of story tends to spread through military communities, regardless of classification levels." She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. "Your employers invested heavily in creating someone like me. But that investment included conditioning me to analyze threats, identify weaknesses, and exploit advantages. Did they really think those same capabilities wouldn't apply to them if they became the threat?" The communication channel remained silent for several minutes as the enemy commander presumably consulted with his superiors. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a note of defeat that everyone on both ships could recognize. "What are your terms?" Maya smiled, though no one except the ship's internal sensors could see it. "Simple. You withdraw immediately and file a report stating that your target was not found aboard this vessel. You recommend that further search efforts be discontinued due to insufficient intelligence, and you ensure that no additional retrieval operations are authorized. And in exchange? In exchange, I don't provide a detailed tactical analysis of this operation to Colonial Security, along with the specifications of your ships and equipment that I've observed. I also don't share what I've learned about your organization's operational procedures with any interested parties." The threat was understated but unmistakable. Maya possessed detailed knowledge of advanced military operations and access to intelligence networks that could cause significant problems for any organization involved in questionable activities. "Captain." Rodriguez activated his own communication system. "Enemy vessels, this is Captain Rodriguez of the civilian transport, Meridian's Edge. I'm officially logging this incident as an unprovoked attack on a neutral civilian vessel. Unless you withdraw immediately, I'll be filing formal complaints with both Colonial Security and the Interstellar Commerce Commission." The combination of Maya's tactical victory and Rodriguez's official response left the enemy commander with no viable options. His mission had failed completely. His forces were neutralized, and continuing the operation would only create additional problems for his employers. "Acknowledged," he said finally. "All units prepare for withdrawal." As the hunter-killer ships began to disengage from the Meridian's Edge, Maya made her way back to the passenger compartment where the other travelers waited with expressions ranging from amazement to terror. Tektar, the Vorthak warrior who had originally been concerned for her safety, looked at her with something approaching religious awe. "Little human," he said in his clicking language before switching to standard. "I owe you an apology, and perhaps my life." Maya settled back into her original seat and retrieved her book, her demeanor shifting back to that of a mild-mannered passenger as if the entire incident had been a minor inconvenience. "No apology necessary. And you were right to be concerned about the dangers of frontier life. You just misunderstood which direction the danger would be coming from." Dr. Kim approached cautiously, her medical scanner in hand. "Miss Chen, are you injured? I should examine you after what you've been through." "I'm fine, doctor. But you might want to check on the people in the cargo bay. Some of them took harder hits than others when they decided to test their luck." The ship's crew began the process of securing the surrendered equipment and ensuring that the unconscious operatives were properly restrained and medically stable. Captain Rodriguez found himself dealing with a situation that fell well outside standard merchant vessel protocols. "Maya," he said, approaching her seat with obvious uncertainty, "we need to discuss what happens next. I can't simply pretend this didn't happen. She looked up from her book with a slight smile. Of course not, Captain. You'll need to file a complete incident report with Colonial Security. I recommend describing me as a passenger with unspecified military training who assisted in repelling a pirate attack. That's accurate without being unnecessarily detailed. And your real identity will remain exactly what it says on my documentation. Maya Chen, colonial settler, traveling to the mining worlds to start a new life. Her expression became serious. Captain, there are people in this galaxy who've done terrible things in service to organizations that may or may not have legitimate authority. Sometimes those people decide they've had enough and want to disappear into quiet civilian lives. Rodriguez studied her face, seeing depths of experience that no young civilian should possess, and sometimes their former employers don't want to let them go. Exactly. But as today demonstrated, some assets are more expensive to retrieve than they're worth keeping. Maya returned to her book, her tone becoming lighter. I suspect my former employers will reach that conclusion and redirect their resources toward more profitable endeavors. As the Meridian's Edge resumed its journey toward the mining colonies, the passengers and crew gradually returned to their normal routines. But the atmosphere aboard the ship had changed fundamentally. Everyone now knew that the quiet young woman reading in the corner was something far more dangerous than she appeared. Dektar, speaking for many of the passengers, summed up the new reality in his straightforward warrior's manner. I will remember this day for the rest of my life, the day I learned that humans can be much more than they seem. Maya looked up from her book one final time, meeting the Vorthak warrior's gaze with amusement. Dektar, that's probably the most important lesson anyone can learn about my species. We're always much more than we seem. She returned to her reading as the ship continued through the void between stars, carrying its cargo of passengers toward new lives on distant worlds. Among them traveled a young woman who had successfully convinced the galaxy's most dangerous people that some investments simply weren't worth pursuing. The book she was reading, several passengers noticed, was a guide to sustainable agriculture techniques for frontier colonies. Maya Chen was preparing for her new life as a farmer, having definitively closed the door on her old life as something much more deadly. Outside the viewports, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small drama that had played out aboard one insignificant transport ship. But for everyone who had witnessed Maya's demonstration of human capabilities, the universe would never look quite the same again.